Mr. Biyani, always great talking to you. The last couple of times I've spoken to you, we've gone through different stages in the evolution of Future Group as well as the economy, and I think this is going to be a wonderful session where we are putting the spotlight on the India story and the evolution of the Indian consumer in the midst of that. And from that, of course, the evolution of modern retail in India. Of course, we're in a room full of experts. We will have a lot of questions from them, but I get my first go with Mr. Biyani to start with. Mr. Biyani, these have been tough times, but you've always been extremely optimistic. Notwithstanding the fact that most retailers are supposed to be optimistic, you've always been optimistic about the India story, and you've always believed that what we've seen is perhaps a temporary blip because the larger story is intact. There are many larger trends that we should be looking at.
I think India is a country of 1.2 billion people and wanting to consume more. And so the retail or the consumption story of India can never be challenged in a sense, because as a human race we'll still want to continue to consume more than what we consumed earlier. So I think that story is still intact and that will continue to go on. I think as a retailer, modern retailer, we tried and attempted quite a few things. Something worked, something didn't work. The delivery model, the cost model, the efficiencies. I think we are much smarter now. So we call it our second innings. In second innings, what we want to do, how do we want to engage with the customers. Having been smarter, having made most of the mistakes. And India is not an easy country. India is a country probably which is celebrating 72 festivals. We add up more festivals every year. And everything is linked around consumption. Our harvesting festival, our religious festivals. So as a country, we want to be better, and the younger generation demographics also wants to consume much more. And there is a yashization of cinema is helping to consume significantly in terms of the Karwa Chauth, the weddings and the festivities which we enjoy. I think Ganesh Chaturthi has moved all over, Karwa Chauth has come down to the south. So India is wanting to consume, wanting to do something which has not done earlier. I believe the biggest change which we have been seeing in the last two surveys which we do a Bharat Darshan wherein we get into smaller towns and understand the social change which is happening in the country. And the biggest change we have seen in the last two times is the woman, the girl child. I think the importance of girl in the life of a family and the way she is playing an important role. And I believe consumption is all about woman as a customer. I believe that's a big change which is happening, and that's a kind of a revolution. I believe if the woman gets empowered in India, the consumption can go much higher. And I believe that change is happening, and it's happening in a significant way, and which is becoming a wave kind of a thing wherein woman is allowed to do much more things than what she was allowed earlier, and she is becoming a very important member of the family.
In many senses, from what we've seen in retail and the consumer's evolution, Mr. Biyani, it seems to be a combination of many moving parts. In the past, when retailers have tried to run the race alongside the market that is changing, they have burnt their fingers because the market is changing, demand is changing far faster than the ability to keep pace with it. Is there a lesson in that, or do you think that because of the larger constraints that we'll always be playing catch up with the evolving market?
I think Indians didn't know which model would work and what is the blend and the categories which will help them to be profitable in terms of the mix, in terms of the margin model, in terms of cost. I think that was the real challenge. The productivity what we got was not exactly as per what the international retailers would get. The average ticket size was not as high as what we thought we would do. Our cost structures were very expensive. I think now we have discovered a model. If you look at Big Bazaar as a model, probably we are now aiming at 30% gross margin model, which no hypermarket in the world can ever dream of getting. So we have invented and created this model wherein 35% of business is coming out of fashion. And we have been working on it for the last 2 years, and we've already achieved what we wanted to achieve. So it's a unique model in a sense. And so has been our other models. But had this recession not come in, had the challenges not come in, we would have not been able to do that. We would have been still aping the Western model of 21% of margin model, even in a hypermarket.
But for every optimist who looks at the large figure, the figures that a McKinsey has put in about $1.5 trillion consumption story by 2025, etc., there are also those who are very skeptical, Mr. Biyani, about the real sheer size or the potential of the Indian market. One view is that India falls off after the first 9 cities, and no matter which category you look at, 60 to 80% of sales come from these cities. So anybody who's looking at real expansion has to, perhaps think twice before really expanding? What's your own experience been? Because you've been there and you've had to pull back slightly.
No, I look at India a little differently than probably, I think they have looked at the entire picture. And I believe there are 2% of population whose consumption would be around 15 to 20,000 SKUs. They are willing to experiment with everything. Then there are other people who, I think the lowest SKU consumption, which is at the lowest level, is around 200 to 300. But that is also rising. So the people aspiration to want new products and new SKUs, as we call it in retail language, is increasing everywhere. So if Coke has gone to the lowest common denominator in a sense in the places, so there is a new SKU which has come in there for consumption. And I believe many things are happening in the country. There is some silent revolution happening everywhere, wherein there is a new consumption category or SKU getting introduced every part of the society.
Is it easier for an FMCG company to do than a retail company? Because in many senses, perhaps FMCG, because it's had a far longer run in India, has been able to understand India far more deeply than a retailer has.
Let me give you an example. We have an investment in a company called Capital Foods. And I was just with the promoter, the entrepreneur yesterday, and Ching Secret is the brand, and they have launched it in Bombay, Pune, Ahmedabad. And they have tried to break up, create a category of consumption of soups at 10 rupees a sachet. And he was telling me he's become the #1 brand in all these 3 cities where we have launched. So it's a very, the category which never existed earlier. People didn't want to drink a soup. They could have survived without it. But it's selling in millions of pieces.
But that is also backed by very big advertising spends.
But you have to spend money, but but the 10 rupees is again a sweet spot to achieve that volumes, which makes it sustainable in terms of advertising and in terms of delivery cost.
Okay. From what you have seen in the last 5 years, 6 years, 2004 to 2007 in many senses was a honeymoon period for the Indian economy, for retailers, and everybody expanded. From there, we saw first a global crisis play out, then you saw a lot of domestic wars. Have any of your early takes on the Indian consumer changed over the period? I mean, has there been a rethink about how you see the consumer?
I think at the consumer level, our thinking has not changed as much. We believe the pace of change and the rate of change varies from community to community, from people to people. Secondly, India, you can't look at it in one single nation. We look at every region and every state as a market now. I think that's significant change which we see. We believe the growth in some states is far higher than the growth in some states. So that's a big change from the way we used to look at things. Thirdly, we believe that the consumers in terms of aspiration across India is very similar. But if you look at our experience in Patna, we entered Patna probably 1.5 years ago, and that store is our most profitable stores, and the per square foot productivity is probably the highest. But it's not because I think Bihar didn't have modern retail, and once they saw modern retail and they leapt it up. So we have planned, we already opened our second store, the third store is opening up.
So Bihar has been likened to an emerging market in the sheer consumption. So is that the way to look at India? Like perhaps the European continent, where with some emerging centers, which some mature retail centers and the kind of strategy has to vary?
I think we have to have state-wise strategy and a city-wise strategy. And like we have been into every northeast smaller towns, from Silchar to Agartala to Guwahati to every Durgapur, every place we have opened our stores. And I think that's been very beneficial to us as a company, because today to make money in Bombay in retail business is impossible. But to make money in Agartala and Patna is reality.
But my question to you is that one could also argue that when you enter a new city, you're still catering to the top percentile of a creamy layer, which is fattened after, into the third decade of liberalization, but you've really not been able to crack the unorganized sector, which still accounts for 90% of India. And that is going to be the next big challenge. Or do you think India just covering the top end is going to be enough?
I won't agree, because if you look at the way we have created festivals, which is the 15th August, 26th January, they are the consumption days of India, and wherein I believe the population which doesn't come on the normal day, they come during these festivals, and these are the customers who gets to experiment, to consume new products. I think most of the manufacturers now work with us to deal with the audience which would normally not come into a modern retail, or are not getting into that SKU consumption which they consume or buy during that period. So I think we have to create events where consumption happen. Nowhere the consumption has happened overnight. I think there has been a journey, there has been a process. The consumers' awareness, experimentation, trial, prototyping, I think it's been happening continuously. And once people get hooked onto a product, I don't think so they go back.
You know, in the 2007-2008 book that you wrote, It Happened in India, you described the Indian consumer as in three categories: the consumer, the serving class, and the struggling class. Has that definition kind of, or has each of those segments blurred into each other somewhere?
I think that still exists, India 1, India 2, India 3 as I call it. I think the pace of India 2 entering into India 1 was nearly 2 to 3%. I don't have statistics to prove it, but I believe that slowed down significantly.
That has slowed down.
And that has slowed down. The migration has become much lesser into like cities like Bombay and all. And that is, urbanization is not happening as much as what we thought. Manufacturing sector has slowed down. There are some centers which are totally troubled by the economic mineral resources mess in a sense. If you look at Goa consumption, if you look at Orissa, I think significantly they are suffering from the economic issues which the state is facing. So there are challenges which has also come in, which is not allowing things to happen the way it was progressing at during that period.
Right. But in a sense, what we are also seeing over the last 3 years, where one part of India has, been complaining about a slowdown, the other has been going up the value chain of aspirations and consumption very rapidly. So somewhere the focus has shifted into the rural area, and it seems as what was seen as the tail is now wagging the economy, and that has created a huge change in the way many companies are viewing India. What's your own perception of that?
I think we look at markets in terms of the SKU, whether that SKU can sell in that rural area or that region or that customer. And we believe there are a lot of SKUs which can move into there, but there is no distribution channel available. So when we introduce Big Bazaar Direct in some pockets, I think the largest selling category which has emerged is a pillow, which is people want a good pillow and it's not available anywhere. And the second category has been a mop, which is cleaning the place. I think this was not available. So we might discover many categories of products where people are willing to spend money, but it's not available because of the distribution system.
So if the FMCG companies played around with products, packaging and price, do you have the leeway to be able to do that in the retail formats?
Absolutely.
Because you've got multiple retail formats. I mean, can there be an SKU which gets tailor-made for a rural economy from a retailer standpoint?
I think if we are successful in Big Bazaar Direct and if you have 100,000 franchisees, any brand, any manufacturer wants to sell any product, we can do a pre-sale of 50,000 pieces on day one. So
that Amway plus Amazon model is working for you?
Again, you are looking at references. I think it's a new model which will be given to the world.
You've possibly, in the rush years between 2004, 2007, 8, you experimented with multiple formats, with multiple kinds of businesses within the umbrella. And I think as a retailer, it was a wonderful experience, even though you did clock up substantial debt to do all of that, to really gauge the market. One interesting example is eZone, which started off as a company which was, looking at the electronic space within the Big Bazaar format. Subsequently, during the height of the troubles, it was seen as the biggest baggage that you had. And there was a lot of speculation. We speculated endlessly about what you're going to do with that. And today it seems that one business is churning a lot more revenue than was anticipated. And that's one of the core movers within the shop floor. What changed for you and eZone, and what are the learnings from that?
I think all our journey of retail, we learned a lot, because by making mistakes you learn. And when the time came for what to do with eZone, we had two options. One was to either sell, merge with somebody, and or do something on our own. So we attempted trying to do the first. We approached everyone to create a kind of consolidation in the business. It didn't work. We tried to align with some other businesses. We reached to some conclusions that didn't work, but we had no other option but to run it on our own. And then we put in all our might and knowledge behind that format. So we regionalized it. We moved out of few territories and few regions, and we concentrated on very few areas. We changed the entire management structure, the entire product mix, the sizing of the store. And from the last 3 months, we are making money in the first electronic retailer who is making money from the last 3 months. We are growing at nearly 35 to 40% same-store sales growth. I think the management, the team which we put in probably was the most experienced team which we had. The best people came in, and we are happy that we were able to turn around a business which
so
was
what are the consumer
probably,
insights from this?
I think there is a demand
it's easier to do a regional, a smaller play rather than looking at the scale, because scale often means lower costs, and that's why many people look at a more centralized option. Is that a learning? That
I think there were a lot of learnings that you cannot spread yourself quite a lot, and there were a lot of challenges in terms of building up the infrastructure, the organization, and the cost which involves in doing that kind of scale. So we in fact reduced our size, and from the lesser size we are doing more business. So getting more out of the same was the theme which we approached in electronic business, because electronic business can only be profitable if your productivity is about 25,000 rupees a square foot, and we were not there. And we had to cut down on cost, and we cut down on cost nearly to the tune of 35 to 55 crores for running the format. And I think that changed everything, and we virtually closed every loss-making store, and which had no potential to make money. So we were very ruthless in that business. And in fact, as a group, we are very soft at times, but we proved our ruthlessness in Exxon.
Yeah, and the last time I know it caused quite a lot of flutter, because on my show you told me that nothing is dispensable or indispensable in this case, and even a format like Big Bazaar, you'd be happy to look at options out there. My question to you is that post the restructuring and the debt rationalization, what you've done is that you've created three pillars within the group. Betting on the large format retail, the Big Bazaar format, brands, and a lot of the agri businesses and the back end. How do you see these three really evolving from here, and what led to the rationalization in this direction?
I think we have been experimenting and doing a lot, and we thought it's high time we create three strong balance sheets. And because I think in this era, balance sheet becomes very important. As a retailer, we never looked at our balance sheet while growing our business. So, and we had options, so we looked down at our business in terms of future, what we want to do, and we came to a conclusion that food and fashion are going to be our two mainstay for business. In fashion, we were already a vertically integrated player, from right from manufacturing to our own brands, to our own distribution, to our own retail. So we thought similar exercise we have to do in food. So that's where Future Ventures, now the name has been changed to Future Consumer Enterprises. And I think we are getting into a lot of products and a lot of branding on food as a business, and we are becoming licensee of many brands. We are building up distribution capabilities, and there are formats like KB's Fair Price, Aadhaar, which are already existing in that company. So that will grow on its own in terms of food and FMCG business. Fashion as a business, Future Lifestyle Fashion is a company which will get listed probably this weekend or probably next week. And that's a company which I believe we have a portfolio of 24, 25 brands, which is also powering this IRF, because the name again rhymed, IRF and FLF. So and we have a lot of investments below this company.
So what is the rationale for the demerger? Unlocking value, looking at more...
Making stronger balance sheets, and making their, every companies or every cash flow should make their business grow, and we should not impeach upon other companies' resources. So Big Bazaar is on its own. The fashion business or the lifestyle fashion business is on, and so is the food business. And all three businesses can have various multiple partners, tie-ups, ventures.
You know, last time we spoke, you spoke about the fact that there is an art and science to business, especially retail. And in the last couple of years, you perhaps focus more on the art. Now it is the science, and now it's 50-50 out there. Looking ahead, after the kind of crisis that we've seen pretty much everybody in retail go through, what is the new model that is emerging, if at all? Or is it only reiterating the fact that India is multiple markets with multiple formats, and don't get carried away with the large numbers, dissect it into niches and then look at it?
I think we are still experimenting. So Big Bazaar Direct is an experiment. We just launched a new format called IMN, which is a young fashion format. We launched 3 stores in the last 1 month. So I think the experimentation will still continue, but I think experimentation is a kind of a prototyping. We are not scaling up until we don't perfect it. I think earlier we scaled up before we perfected it. So there is a shift and there is a change. But I believe this business is evolving. You can't be constant in this business. Our experimentation with a concept called food hall has worked good dividends for us. We have been able to create the high-end food model in a value company in a sense, and we have been able to open multiple stores. But we are not scaling up there fast. Today, when my daughter runs that business, and when I tell her I'm getting a store, the best mall of India on a revenue sharing, she says, I have studied that locality and we don't have experts, so I don't want to do that store. So I think that kind of a scenario we have been able to bring into the organization, which was earlier not there. Earlier we would have jumped on an opportunity of doing a store everywhere.
The next is the rural, urban, middle class, lower middle class, high-end consumption. All of that is merging. I mean, there's somewhere, it's as though you put it all into not a melting pot, but a pot where everything is coexisting and expanding and has mutating on its own. So how do you make sense of this chaos to be able to benefit from the chaos?
I think we have a lot of people don't know, but we have probably 3 or 4 companies of ours. We have invested in many design companies. We have a company called IDEAM, which is a multidisciplinary design firm, which tries to understand India through the graphic route. We have a company called Future Brands, which understand the social part of India and look at the brands. We have a company called DMA, which does the FMCG packaging design. So there are many companies, and then we have Future Ideas, which my elder daughter runs, which understand India's communities and how do communities they consume things. So we have an almanac and calendar for each and every community of India. We track the fasting and the feasting events of every community. So there's a lot of work which is happening behind, which is helping us to understand India a little better and allowing us to not make mistakes much larger because of the amount of research and amount of work which we do behind. I think this helps us to do business, and they are the softer side of doing things. I think understanding India is something which we believe is a work which we do quite deeply.
And it's a long process.
It's a continuing process, and it doesn't end because India is changing at a pace which is unimaginable at the social side.
Every time I've spoken about models, the Walmart model, the Amazon model, you've always held back and said, no, India has its own model, we are figuring it out and no external model can be imposed on India. A lot of international retailers are making their way into India. It's a long process, depending on what happens in the elections, etc. But my question to you is that after having spent nearly 3 decades in the business of retail, is there a model that is intrinsically Indian, or is chaos going to be the bedrock from which a lot of the formats are going to emerge?
I think there are models which are emerging. I think a lot of Indian models, like we were discussing, Fab India as a model which has emerged out of India, and they are looking at the Indian way of products in every which. So there are models which are emerging. We are all discovering our model. Like Big Bazaar is again a unique model which has non-food component in hypermarket, which is greater than 60%. So there are models which are emerging. Even in terms of fashion or a departmental store, Central as a model has a very unique model in terms of giving spaces to brands and compete in the marketplace. So there are models which have emerged. I think Shoppers Stop will be unique in its own way, and it's not be exactly a replica of any other model in the West. So Indians will create an Indian model in some sense or the other.
And it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that.